Hi, welcome back to our channel, Wig Out, where we wig out over topics that matter to us, and we think they might matter to you. We wigged out over self-help, self-image. We've also wigged out over bullying, and last week we started our two-part series over Black Lives Matter, and we're gonna wrap that up this week as we cover If you haven't liked and subscribed to our channel, make sure you go ahead and click that button and get notifications when we do our weekly uploads. You don't want to miss out because our topics are crazy cool. And if you can, comment and share. If you share, our message gets out. Okay, we're about to go in, sis. I'm going to cover it. We're going to talk about slavery and we're going to talk about white privilege. This is the final part of our two-part series where we are discovering Black Lives Matter and what that means. My name is Haha, and that stands for Happy Happenings Here. And that's what I'm really trying to bring you. Although this is a very controversial topic, it is a topic that needs to be talked about. So I suggest sharing this with your friends, posting it on your feed. If you can, have that sit-down talk with your family. Now let's get into it. We're going to have to roll back time. About 401 years. That was about 2 years before I was born the second time. But that's another story, and we've got things to talk about. So we're in 1619, and a man known as the White Lion, or as modern day would call the Tiger King, bought over 20 slaves. And he brought them to Jamestown, Virginia. And that is a mark in history because that's the first time that America ever received slaves. Let's fast forward again to the Revolutionary War. We fought, we're free from British colonies, and we are now America. I find that so ironic that we fought so hard to free ourselves from our oppressor while we were also oppressing millions and millions of Black African Americans. It's very quickly, the North and the South started to have disagreements because as it looks at with slavery being so popular in the South and being such a generator of income with such low labor cost, the North decided that slaves were now worth 3/5 of a person with regards to taxation and representation. Can you imagine 3/5 of haha? All right, y'all, we are in the year 1793. I know I skip a lot, but that's because there's a ton of history during this time, so feel free to do your own research. This, however, is a really important fact. The cotton gin was invented in 1793, and with the invention of the cotton gin, and cotton became the largest export of America. And this really pissed off the North. All right, so the North is mad, the South is making tons of money. That's where the abolishment of slavery, the idea came from. It was financial. It was not fair. It was not allowing one to succeed over the other. So that's when that movement started. The African slave trade was finally outlawed in 1808. However, something different started to happen. The domestic slave trade grew quickly. 4 million slaves by the year 1860 had been domestically traded, no longer using the African slave trade. Slave owners wanted their slaves to be dependent upon them, so they had strict sets of codes that restricted things like their movement, their behavioral patterns, and even their ability to learn, like reading and writing. House slaves were pitted against field working slaves. There was no uprising or mutiny. There was no fraternizing between slaves. They wanted to keep them low and down so that they didn't know that they were actual people. And unfortunately, Black women were often subject to sexual abuse. Slaves began to rebel. Most of the time when slaves would organize a rebellion, it would end in a massacre of the slaves or any kind of other people involved. However, it did show the owners that they are not scared, that they're working together to fight for their freedom, and that alarmed them. Was it slaveholding being a sin? Was it too much free labor for the South that fueled the start of the abolishment of slavery? I'm not sure, but regardless, it was a huge step in the demise of slavery and ultimately the uprising of the Civil War. Notable mentions of the pre-Civil War movements to abolish slavery are like the Underground Railroad, where you have Harriet Tubman, the black woman who changed the history of so many Southern black slaves' lives, the Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Both of these were fights over whether this state should be admitted to the Americas with or without the right to hold slaves. And then finally, the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry, which was one of the first successful raids where black people were actually able to kill white people. Hooray! Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and 3 months later, 7 states seceded from the Americas to create the Confederate States of America. Okay, slavery ended January 1st, 1863, with the Emancipation Proclamation, and was fully abolished with the addition of the 13th Amendment, as well as the end of the Civil War. Of course, this is only the beginning, and it's not a complete full story of everything that went on. However, I think it gives you the idea of why Black Lives Matter. Slavery is no joke, and it happened. And sometimes, even myself, I'm going to be honest, it doesn't cross my mind as it should every day when you step out the door. Because guess what? It wasn't that long ago. All right, our second topic of the day, white privilege, and who would know better than me, a white male who also has male privilege. This is something that I struggled to learn with as a younger 20-year-old person. I remember distinctly having a 10-time level volume fight with a lesbian on a boat in Belize about the non-existence of white privilege. I'm here today to tell you that it does exist. White privilege is like an invisible knapsack full of things like a compass, blank checks, guides, code boards, passbooks, visas, advantages. That is white privilege. White privilege is obvious and less obvious. They're passive advantages white people may be or may be not aware that they have. And that's the difference between bias and racial prejudice. White privilege is also getting the job, an interview. It's not hearing the sound of doors locking as you walk by. It is not having people look down and grab tight to their purses when you both enter Walmart. Having the clerk check your receipt and letting the group of white people go by, which I was part of yesterday. There's a big misunderstanding and people are getting defensive over this. It's not like white privilege is something you did wrong. It's inherent. It's a social opportunity given to you at birth, and we're actually taught to not see it. And so that's why it's important to talk about it, because a lot of us are unaware and black people are tired of preaching. So that's why I stepped in as Haha today to bring you both topics, slavery and white privilege. The reason Black Lives Matter, not completely, but pretty much. So you might be wondering, well, how do I get rid of my white privilege? Well, it's hard. It's going to take work, and I don't know all the answers because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. What you can do is look up and smile at everyone you see, not just the white people with the pretty dog. It's open the door for anyone. It's stand up for police brutality when you see it happening. Don't be scared. These people's lives matter too, and if you were in the same situation, you would want them to jump in and say something, stop that police officer, whatever it took. So that's what I'm trying to get at. I hope you took a good message away. Thank you again for tuning in to Wig Out, where we wig out over different topics. Sometimes they're complicated. But next week, good news, Miss Wiggins is back in the studio. Kinda. She's going to join us from South Padre Island via web, and we're going to do a little interview with her with facts over communication. Tune in next week. It's been a pleasure. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Wig Out with Haha. Until next time, I think it's time to go.